I was saying that Scripture tells us that those who endure to the end, the same shall be saved.
Sveto pismo pravi, da bodo rešeni tisti, ki bodo ustrajali do konca.
So I will be looking at all those who leave before the end.
Torej se bom pogovoril s tistimi, ki bodo šli pred koncem.
Now, what I'd like to do in this session is to take a closer look at Genesis chapters 2 and 3.
Zdaj se bomo lotili 2. in 3. poglavja v prvi Mojzesovi.
And I want to look at some aspects of these chapters which are normally, I would say, ignored.
In rad bi pogledal nekatere vidike teh poglavij, za katere menim, da jih normalno prezremo.
And my aim in looking at these chapters
Moj cilj s tem
is to try to show that you can read the Bible at two different levels.
Pokazati, da lahko Sveto pismo beremo na 2 nivojih.
You can read the surface level of Scripture.
Lahko berete površinsko.
And if you do that, you will learn a great deal.
Če boste tako brali Sveto pismo, boste se veliko naučili.
But you can also go deeper.
Lahko pa greste globlje.
Without misinterpreting the text.
In pri tem ne tolmačite Svetega pisma napačno.
And we can find matters there which I believe will nurture us spiritually.
Našli bomo tam stvari, verjamem, ki nam bodo pomenile tudi duhovno hrano.
So what we'll be looking at is one particular aspect of Genesis 2, and particularly Genesis 2 and 3, although we will mention chapter 1.
Omenili bomo tudi prvo vprašanje, ampak zdaj bomo gledali vidike, poseben vidik, ki je viden v 2. in 3. poglavju najbolj.
And that is what I've called sanctuary symbolism in these chapters.
To je simbolizem svetišča, simboli svetišča v teh poglavjih.
So we're going to look at this, and let me just explain what the scope of this study is.
Zdaj bi najprej povedal, kaj je naš cilj pri proučevanju teh poglavij.
I'm going to investigate the use of symbolism in Genesis 1 to 3.
Radi bi se poglobili malo v simbole, ki jih najdemo v 2. in 3. poglavju prve Mojzesove.
And we're going to explore the significance of that symbolism.
In bomo raziskovali pomen ali pa pomembnost teh simbolov, ki jih najdemo.
For first of all, understanding the meaning of the Genesis text.
Predvsem razumevanje besedila.
And then also applying that text to our lives.
In potem uporabo za svoje življenje.
So it's first understanding and then applying.
Najprej razumevanje, potem pa uporaba.
And then of course we'll look at other matters as they arise.
Potem bomo gledali še nekatere druge stvari, kakor pridejo na vrsto.
Now we already saw the first verse of Genesis chapter 1.
Prebrali smo že prvo vrsto v 2. poglavju.
In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth.
Ne, začetek Svetega pisma, v začetku je Bog ustvaril nebo in zemljo.
And when we were looking at that, we saw that shows that God is the Lord of time.
Takrat smo rekli, da je Bog gospodar časa,
the limits of time,
omejitev časa
and the limits of space.
In omejitev prostora.
He is the Lord of time and space.
On je gospodar časa in prostora.
Now, there is another way in which Genesis 1 indicates that God is the Lord of time and space.
Prvo poglavje v prvi Mojzesovi še na en drug način označuje Boga kot gospodarja časa in prostora.
And we see that when we ask the question, what is it that God names in chapter 1?
To vidimo, ko se vprašamo, kaj v prvem poglavju Bog imenuje.
In fact, there are only 3 things that God names in chapter 1.
V prvem poglavju pravzaprav on daje ime samo 3 stvarem.
Let's have a look at what they are.
Poglejmo, kaj natančno.
The first thing that God names in verse 5.
V 5. vrsti beremo, da Bog imenuje
God called the light day and the darkness he called night.
Da je imenoval svetli del dan in temo je imenoval noč.
And then in verse 8,
v 8. vrsti pa
God called the firmament heaven.
Je Bog obok imenoval nebo.
And then in verse 10,
v 10. vrsti
he calls the dry land earth
On imenuje kopno zemlja
and the waters that were gathered together he called seas.
in vode zbrane na enem mestu je imenoval morje.
And those are the only things that God names in Genesis 1.
To so edine stvari, ki jih Bog pravzaprav imenuje v prvem poglavju.
He names day and night,
Dan in noč,
the heavens,
nebo,
the earth,
zemljo
and the seas.
in morje.
Now, to the Hebrew mind, remember these are the original people who heard this, to the Hebrew mind.
Hebrejcem, in vi se spomnite, da so to bili prvi bralci prve Mojzesove knjige, v njihovem umu
Day and night is how you measure time,
je dan in noč, omemba dneva in noči je pomenilo
and
čas.
the heavens, the earth, and the sea, that's the totality of space.
Nebo, zemlja, morje, to je vse, kar se lahko reče o prostoru.
So God names the basic elements of time and space.
Bog je torej imenoval tukaj osnovne prvine časa in prostora.
He is the Lord of time and space.
On je gospodar časa in prostora.
But what I want to look at is something which Genesis also emphasizes,
Rad pa bi videl tudi nekaj, kar prva Mojzesova poudarja,
but for us who are reading it, that is for us in the 21st century,
ampak za današnjega bralca v 21. stoletju
this is not so easily seen.
Ni tako očitno.
But Genesis is concerned not only with time and space,
Prva Mojzesova ne gleda samo čas in prostor,
but also with holy time and holy space.
ampak se ukvarja s svetim časom in svetim prostorom.
So if we just have a quick look at that basic diagram of Genesis 1 again,
Če ponovno pogledamo ta diagram, ki smo ga naredili za prvo poglavje,
this is just to remind us of that general grid which concludes with the seventh day.
bomo videli to razpredelnico, ki se zaključi s 7. dnem.
When we come back to this particular diagram
Ko se vrnemo na ta diagram
and ask, what does it have to say about time?
in se vprašamo, kaj nam ta govori o času,
Then the following occurs. So keep that basic grid in your mind that's on the screen,
imejte to, kar vidite zdaj na zaslonu v mislih,
and then we get this.
in potem dobimo tole.
You see that the account begins with time,
Poročilo se začne s časom,
in the beginning.
v začetku.
When did this happen?
Kdaj se je to zgodilo?
At what point in time?
V katerem trenutku časa?
In the beginning.
V začetku.
And then the beginning of the first column on the first day,
In to je začetek prvega stebra v prvem dnevu,
we get the creation of light,
oziroma, kako se reče, stolpca, ja? Hvala.
and that then gives us the distinction between day and night.
Tukaj vidimo razliko med dnevom in nočjo.
And that is the rhythm which measures time.
To je ritem, ki nam pravzaprav meri čas.
There was evening and morning a first day,
Bil je večer in jutro prvi dan,
evening and morning a second day.
večer in jutro drugi dan.
So from the earth-centered point of view,
Če ga gledamo iz zornega kota zemlje,
we have the creation of time.
imamo stvarjenje časa.
Then we come to the fourth day,
Potem pridemo do 4. dne,
when God creates the heavenly lights.
ko Bog ustvarja svetila na nebu.
And these lights are to measure time.
Ta so postavljena, da bi merila čas.
They are for signs and seasons and days and years.
Določajo dneve in čase, praznike, leta.
And then every one of those 6 days ends with there was evening and there was morning, a first day, second day, third day.
In vsak dan, pravzaprav poročilo o vsakem dnevu se konča s tem. Večer in jutro, prvi, drugi, tretji in 6. dan.
And so it sets out time.
Na ta način imamo idejo, oziroma je postavljena ideja časa.
And then on the 7th day we have holy time.
Na 7. dan pa imamo sveti čas.
So we have moved from ordinary time to holy time, Sabbath time.
Naredili smo prestop iz navadnega časa na sveti čas.
Now, seeing that, I hope that is fairly straightforward.
Upam, da je to popolnoma jasno.
We've talked about holy time and the Sabbath earlier on today.
Danes smo že govorili o svetem času, soboti.
But what I want to do is now take you the second step
Rad pa bi, da naredimo zdaj drugi korak
and try to show that Genesis is concerned not only with holy time,
in bi rad pokazal pri njem, da prva Mojzesova knjiga ni zainteresirana samo za sveti čas,
but holy space.
ampak tudi sveti prostor.
And in the Bible, what is a holy space?
Kaj je v svetem pismu sveti prostor?
It is a sanctuary,
To je svetišče,
a temple,
tempelj,
a holy place.
sveti prostor.
And so let's see how Genesis builds up a picture of this sanctuary symbolism in creation and what it might mean for us.
Poglejmo, kaj torej sveto pismo govori o svetem prostoru. Pravzaprav sveti prostor, ko sem povedal, je svetišče v smislu sveto in najsvetejše. Sveto je holy place.
Now on the fourth day, when God creates the lights in the sky,
Ko je na četrti dan Bog ustvaril svetila,
the Hebrew word for lights
je beseda, ki jo uporablja hebrejščina za
is, as you see there, the word maor.
maor, za
Now,
luči.
this, the only other place that this word occurs in the rest of the books of Moses
V Petroknjižju se ta beseda pojavlja samo še enkrat.
the only other place it is found is in its description of the sanctuary.
In sicer v opisu svetišča.
And it refers to the lights that are in the sanctuary.
In z njo se opisujejo luči, ki so v svetišču.
So here in Genesis 1, it's as if the sun and the moon and the stars are like lights in the sanctuary of creation.
Tukaj torej vidimo sonce, mesec in zvezde kot luči, ki so v svetišču.
So let's just bear that point in mind.
Imejmo to v mislih.
Then let's have a look at the seventh day.
Poglejmo zdaj sedmi dan.
Now, if I were to ask you, what does God do on the seventh day?
Če bi vas vprašal, kaj Bog počne na sedmi dan,
Well, he does a number of things,
več stvari bi rekli.
but of course he rests.
Ampak ena od teh je, da počiva.
In verse 2, it tells us he rested on the seventh day.
V drugi vrsti beremo, na sedmi dan je počival.
Verse 3, God rested from all his work.
V tretji vrsti Bog je počival od vsega svojega dela.
Now, to us, to rest means, well, it means to rest.
Nam počivati pomeni počivati.
But to the original hearers of this, there would be an added significance.
Za tiste, ki so brali to besedilo prvi, tukaj je bilo nekaj več.
Because in all of the cultures surrounding Israel, their gods also rested.
V kulturah, med katerimi so Judje živeli, tudi njihovi bogovi so počivali namreč.
But where did these other gods rest?
Kje pa so počivali ti drugi bogovi?
They rested in sanctuaries.
Počivali so v svetiščih.
That's what a sanctuary was.
Svetišče je bilo zato.
It was a place where the gods rested.
Kraj, kjer je lahko božanstvo počivalo.
So let me give you a couple of examples from texts outside of Israel.
Naj vam dam nekaj primerov iz besedil zunaj judovskih.
Maybe you could just read that.
Morda bi prebrali to. Hiša bogov Anune, ki imajo veliko moč, ki daje ljudem modrost, hiša, kraj počivanja velikih bogov. Sumerska tempelska himna.
So here, the gods they're in the house of the gods and they are resting. It's the restful dwelling place of the gods.
Torej, prizor se gleda v hiši bogov in oni tam počivajo.
So the sanctuary is a resting place.
Svetišče, torej počivališče se reče.
Let's just look at the second one as well.
Poglejmo drugo. Mi, glavni bogovi, bomo naredili svetišče, katerega ime bo beseda. Tvoja izba bo kraj, kjer se bomo ustavili, kjer bomo našli počitek.
Okay, so we shall find rest, it says.
Tukaj bomo našli bomo počitek.
Where are they going to find rest?
Kje ga bodo našli?
In the shrine or the sanctuary.
v svetišču.
And so when we now read some passages in the Old Testament, they begin to make a little more sense.
Ko zdaj s tem v mislih beremo nekatere dele Stare zaveze, potem kot da dobijo večji pomen.
Let's look at Psalm 132 as an example.
Poglejmo Psalm 132 kot primer.
Maybe, could you read that?
Stopimo v njegova prebivališča, padimo na kolena k podnožju njegovih nog. Vzdigni se Gospod k svojemu počivališču, ti in skrinja tvoje moči. Zakaj Gospod je izbral Sion, zaželel si ga je za prebivališče. To je moje počivališče za vedno. Tu bom prebival, ker sem si ga zaželel.
So it says, rise up, O Lord, and go to your resting place.
Vstani, Bog, in gremo v tvoje počivališče.
Well, this is clearly the temple,
To je očitno tempelj,
the sanctuary.
svetišče.
It talks about the ark,
Govori tukaj o skrinji.
which is in the most holy place of the temple.
To je v najsvetejšem svetišča.
And then it talks about Zion.
Potem govori o Sionu.
What is Mount Zion?
Kaj je gora Sion?
It's the place on which the temple, the sanctuary stands.
To je pravzaprav kraj, kjer stoji tempelj.
And God says, this is my resting place.
Bog pravi, to je moje počivališče.
So when we read the account of the seventh day,
Ko beremo tukaj poročilo o 7. dnevu
and it talks about God resting on the seventh day,
in ko nam besedilo pravi, da je Bog počival na 7. dan,
we might think only of the Sabbath.
lahko mislimo samo na soboto,
But the original hearers would have thought not only of Sabbath,
ampak prvi bravci, oziroma tisti, ki so slišali brano besedilo,
but also of the sanctuary,
niso mislili samo na soboto, ampak tudi na tempelj.
because that's where God rests.
Ker tempelj je kraj, kjer Bog počiva.
Now, if we move on from those basic points,
Če se iz teh začetnih korakov premaknemo naprej,
in the Old Testament, the sanctuary is presented as a model of creation.
Sveto pismo, pravzaprav Stara zaveza, predstavlja svetišče kot model stvarjenja.
There's a very close connection between creation and the sanctuary.
Zelo ozka zveza je med svetiščem in stvarjenjem.
In fact, so close
Tako blizu sta si,
that we shouldn't study one without studying the other.
da ne smemo proučevati enega brez drugega.
Now, when the Old Testament, when the Bible talks about the universe in which we live,
Ko Stara zaveza govori o vesolju, v katerem živimo,
it gives us a simplified picture of the universe.
nam daje pravzaprav preprosto podobo vesolja.
So it sees the universe as having three levels, three tiers to the universe.
Pravzaprav govori o tem, da vesolje ima 3 stopnice, recimo, ali pa 3 nivoje.
So at the top we have what's called the invisible heavens.
Na vrhu je pravzaprav nevidno nebo.
This is where God lives, the abode of God.
Tam živi, prebiva Bog.
And then below the invisible heavens we have the visible heavens.
Pod nevidnim je vidno nebo.
That's the abode of the luminaries, the sun, the moon and the stars.
Tam lahko vidimo svetila, sonce, mesec in zvezde.
And then below the visible heavens
Pod vidnim nebom
we have the earth and the seas.
imamo zemljo in morje.
This is where we live,
Tukaj živimo mi
along with the animal
in
creation.
živali z nami vred.
So those are the three areas of the universe, or the three areas of creation, if you like.
To so področja vesolja ali pa kraj prebivanja.
Now, what has that got to do with the sanctuary, you might ask?
Lahko se sprašujete sedaj, kaj ima to opraviti s svetiščem.
Well, let's just remind ourselves of the basic structure of the sanctuary.
Spomnimo se, kako je skicirano svetišče.
Here we have the main point of attention, center of attention.
Tu, torej naš fokus je tukaj, naša pozornost je usmerjena na tisto točko.
Now you remember that this is divided into two sections.
Vi se spominjate, da je to razdeljeno na dva prostora.
We have the most holy place where the Ark of the Covenant is.
Imamo najsvetejše, tam, kjer je skrinja zaveze.
And then we have the holy place
In imamo sveto,
with the menorah, the seven-branch
kjer je
candlestick and other
menora, sedmerokraki svečnik.
And then we have the outer court
Potem imamo dvorišče,
where we have the sacrifices take place in the outer court.
kjer se dogaja darovanje oziroma žrtve.
So let's just remind ourselves of how that's put together then.
Poglejmo zdaj te stvari skupaj.
These three areas of the sanctuary.
Ta tri področja v svetišču, s tem, kar smo rekli.
We have the most holy place,
Imamo najsvetejše,
which is the abode of God.
to je Božje prebivališče.
Then, as we moving out, we come to the holy place.
Potem gremo ven iz najsvetejšega in pridemo v sveto.
We have the menorah, luminaries, and
Tam
within the
imamo
most-
menoro,
the holy place.
ki sveti.
And then we have the outer courtyard,
In potem imamo dvorišče.
where we have animal sacrifices for human sin.
Tam so živali žrtvovane za človekov greh.
Now, I'd like to compare them for you.
Rad bi za vas zdaj primerjal to dvoje.
Let's just remind ourselves of the basic model of the universe.
Spomnimo se zdaj, kako izgleda vesolje.
We have the invisible heavens, the abode of God.
Nevidno vesolje, tam, kjer Bog prebiva.
The visible heavens are the abode of the luminaries.
Vidno vesolje, kjer prebivajo svetila.
And we have the earth and seas, which are the abode of humans and animals.
Zemlja in morje, kjer prebivajo ljudje in živali.
Now, you remember the sanctuary.
In zdaj svetišče.
We looked at how the sanctuary is structured, and we had it sitting on the ground. Okay, it was horizontal.
Videli smo svetišče, ki je nekako vodoravno, kjer je na zemlji.
It's getting a little late in the day for you to use your imagination, I know.
Vem, da je že precej pozno, da bi uporabljali kako se reče, domišljijo.
But if you bear with me,
Ampak če mi prenašate še vedno,
let's turn the sanctuary through 90 degrees.
probajmo dvigniti oziroma obrniti svetišče za 90 stopinj.
Stand it on its end.
Da stoji na boku. Ne, na hrbtu, po koncu.
And then what do we see?
Kaj
Well,
vidimo v tem primeru?
we have the most holy place,
Najprej imamo najsvetejše,
which is the abode of God.
kjer je Božje prebivališče,
We then have the holy place,
potem sveto,
where we have the menorah, luminaries.
kjer so luči, menora.
And do you remember what I said about Genesis 1, when it talked about the lights on the fourth day?
Se spomnite, kaj sem rekel, ko smo govorili o četrtem dnevu stvarjenja iz prve Mojzesove?
The word it used for lights is used in only one other place in the books of Moses.
Beseda, ki je tam uporabljena za luči, je uporabljena samo še enkrat v Peteroknjižju.
And that is, it describes the lights in the holy place.
To je, smo rekli, ko opisuje luči v svetem.
And then we have the outer court.
In potem imamo dvorišče.
Can you see then that the structure of the sanctuary
Ali vidite strukturo svetišča,
mimics the structure of the universe?
ki pravzaprav daje slutiti, kakšna je struktura vesolja.
The sanctuary is a
Ponazarja.
miniature representation of creation.
Če hočete, je svetišče miniatura stvarjenja, oziroma stvarjenja.
Each has the same three levels with
Eno-
the same three significance of the same three levels.
Vse, eno in drugo je razdeljeno na tri in ima isti pomen.
Now, this might then well explain an odd thing.
To torej lahko pojasni eno čudno zadevo.
Remember when Solomon builds his temple?
Vi se spomnite, ko je Salomon zgradil tempelj.
Solomon's temple is just a permanent sanctuary.
Ta tempelj je pravzaprav bil trajno svetišče ali pa šotor, trajni šotor.
And in 1 Kings chapter 7,
V 7. poglavju prve knjige Kraljev
It says that he put this in the outer courtyard.
On pravi, da je, besedilo pravi, da je Salomon na dvorišče postavil,
Do you want to read that for us?
brali bomo, na to je naredil ulito morje. Od enega roba do drugega je merilo 10 komolcev. Bilo je okrogle oblike, 5 komolcev visoko, 30 komolcev pa je znašal njegov obseg. Pod robom ga je obkrožal venec buč, po 10 na komolec. V dveh vrstah je morje obdajal venec buč, ki so bile ulite hkrati z njim.
Why would you want to have a molten sea in the outer court of the temple?
Zakaj bi na dvorišču imeli ulito morje, na dvorišču templja?
Here's a model of the sea
Tu
in
je
the outer court.
model morja v dvorišču.
Well, that might seem odd,
Morda se vam zdi nenavadno, čudno.
but isn't it exactly what you would expect to find in the sanctuary?
Ampak ali ni to ravno tisto, kar bi pričakovali, da boste našli v svetišču?
If the sanctuary is a miniature representation of creation.
Če je dejansko svetišče miniaturna predstavitev stvarjenja.
And the outer court of the sanctuary
In dvorišče torej
represents the earth and the seas. The earth and the what?
predstavlja zemljo in kaj?
The earth and the seas of creation.
Zemljo in morje pri stvarjenju.
That's why you need a sea in the outer court.
Zato potrebujete na dvorišču morje.
So, I could look at a number of other details, but I hope I have at least made the suggestion to you
Lahko bi se ukvarjali še z mnogimi detajli, upam pa, da sem vam nekako nakazal.
that there is at least a connection between creation and the sanctuary.
Vsaj to, da obstaja povezava med stvarjenjem in svetiščem.
But there's more.
Ampak je tukaj še nekaj.
We've looked at how Genesis structures the account of creation in Genesis chapter 1.
Gledali smo v prvem poglavju, kako je strukturirano stvarjenje.
That's how the heavens and the earth were made.
Tako so ustvarjeni nebo in zemlja.
But let's look at how the sanctuary was made.
Poglejmo zdaj, kako je svetišče narejeno.
And we find this in the book of Exodus.
To najdemo v drugi Mojzesovi knjigi.
And God makes a number of statements which punctuate the building of the sanctuary.
Tukaj Bog daje nekaj izjav, ki določajo ali pa dajo poudarke za graditev svetišča.
The first is Exodus 25, 1 and 2.
Prvega najdemo v prvi in drugi vrsti 25. poglavja druge Mojzesove.
The Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to take for me an offering.
Gospod je rekel Mojzesu, povej Izraelcem, naj mi poberejo zame dar.
The second statement,
Druga je bila,
the Lord spoke to Moses,
Gospod je povedal Mojzesu,
when you take a census of the Israelites.
ko ugotavljaš število Izraelovih sinov.
The third statement, the Lord spoke to
Tretja izjava,
Moses,
Gospod je rekel Mojzesu,
you shall make a bronze basin with a bronze stand for washing.
naredi bronast umivalnik z bronastim stojalom za umivanje.
The fourth statement,
Še ena
the Lord spoke to Moses,
izjava, Gospod je spregovoril Mojzesu,
take the finest spices.
vzemi si najbolj dragocene dišave.
Is that the fourth? The fifth,
To je peta.
the Lord said to Moses,
Gospod je rekel Mojzesu,
take sweet spices.
vzemi si dišave.
The sixth,
Šesta.
the Lord spoke to Moses,
Gospod je spregovoril Mojzesu in rekel,
see, I have called by name Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah.
poklical sem po imenu Becalela, sina Urijaja in tako naprej.
And the seventh,
In sedma omemba oziroma izjava,
the seventh statement by God.
Božja izjava.
The Lord said to Moses,
Gospod je rekel Mojzesu,
you yourself are to speak to the Israelites.
govori Izraelovim sinovom in reci,
You shall keep my Sabbaths,
glejte, da boste praznovali moje sobote.
for this is a sign between me and you throughout all generations.
Ker je to znamenje med mano in vami za vse rodove.
Now, let me just summarize that on one slide so I can underline the significance.
Naj vse zdaj postavim, dovolite mi, da vse postavim na en slajd, da bi videli pomen vsega tega.
In the creation of the heavens and the earth,
Pri stvarjenju nebes in zemlje,
there are 7 stages, aren't there?
tam je 7 korakov,
There are 7 days of creation.
7 dni stvarjenja.
That's how creation was put together.
Tako se je stvarjenje zgodilo.
With the sanctuary,
V primeru svetišča,
notice how creation was done. Creation was done by saying, and God said.
vi se spomnite, da se je stvarjenje dogajalo tako, da vedno preberemo in rekel je Gospod.
And God said.
Gospod je pripovedal.
With the creation or building of the sanctuary.
Ko so ustvarjali oziroma gradili svetišče,
The Lord said to Moses.
Gospod je rekel Mojzesu.
The Lord spoke to Moses.
Gospod je govoril Mojzesu.
The Lord spoke to Moses.
In tako naprej. Gospod je spregovoril.
The Lord spoke to Moses.
Gospod je spregovoril Mojzesu.
The Lord spoke to Moses.
Gospod je spregovoril Mojzesu.
And on the 7th time it says the Lord said to Moses.
Sedmič je povedano, Gospod je spregovoril Mojzesu.
You shall keep my Sabbaths.
Glejte, da boste praznovali moje sobote.
The creation of the heavens and the earth goes through 7 stages.
Stvarjenje nebes in zemlje gre po 7 korakih
Concluding with the Sabbath.
in se konča s soboto.
The building of the sanctuary
Graditev svetišča
goes through 7 stages.
prav tako skozi 7 korakov
Concluding with the
in se
sanctuary.
konča s soboto.
This is no coincidence.
To ni slučajno.
It's the way in which the Bible wants us to say
To je način, kako svetopismo pravi,
there is a connection between creation
tu je povezava med stvarjenjem
and the sanctuary.
in svetiščem.
Now, let's have a look at some other details on this, just briefly.
Poglejmo na kratko še nekaj detajlov.
There is similar language used in the account of creation and the account of the building of the sanctuary.
Poročilo o stvarjenju in poročilo o graditvi svetišča uporablja podoben jezik.
So we'll just quickly look at some of these.
Poglejmo nekratko nekaj teh.
In Genesis 1:31,
V prvi Mojzesovi, prvem poglavju 31,
God saw everything that he had
in
made.
Bog je videl vse, kar je naredil,
Behold, it was very good.
in glej, bilo je zelo dobro.
And with the sanctuary,
V primeru svetišča,
Moses saw all the work that they'd done.
Mojzes je tedaj videl, da so dokončali vse delo.
And behold, they'd done it.
In poglejte, končali so.
Genesis 2, verse 2.
V prvem Mojzesovi 2:2,
On the 7th day, God finished his work, which he'd
7.
done.
dan je Bog dokončal delo, ki ga je naredil.
And with the sanctuary,
V primeru svetišča,
so Moses finished the work.
tako je Mojzes dokončal delo.
Genesis 2, verse 3.
Prva Mojzesova 2:3,
So God blessed the 7th day.
Bog je blagoslovil 7. dan,
And with the sanctuary,
svetišče,
Moses blessed them.
Mojzes jih je blagoslovil.
Genesis 2, verse 1.
Prva Mojzesova 2:1,
Thus the heavens and the earth were finished.
tako sta bila dokončana nebo in zemlja.
And with the sanctuary, thus all the work of the tabernacle of the tent of meeting was finished.
Tako je končano delo, vse delo pri svetišču.
Now, these similarities that I've just gone through very quickly
To zdaj, kar sem prebral zelo na kratko, te podobnosti,
are more apparent in the original language, I think, than they are in
se bolj
translation.
opazijo v originalu, kot pa v prevodu.
You take this last pair, for example.
Naprimer, ta zadnji primer.
A literal translation would have it that in Genesis it says, thus was finished.
Dobesedni prevod tega na levi strani, tako je končano.
And in Exodus 39, literally the sentence begins, thus was finished.
In druga Mojzesova 39 pravi prav tako dobesedno, tako je končano.
And those are the only 2 places in the Old Testament, only 2 places in the Bible where that phrase is used.
In to sta edina 2 kraja v Svetem pismu sploh, kjer se uporablja ta fraza.
The creation of the heavens and the earth
Ustvarjenje sveta, nebesa in zemlje
and the building of the sanctuary,
in graditev svetišča.
thus was finished.
Tako je bilo končano.
Now, some other interesting details.
Še nekaj podrobnosti, ki so zanimive.
Well, interesting to me, at least.
Meni zanimive vsaj.
And that is how, to begin with, how the Garden of Eden and the sanctuary are similar.
To je podobnost vrta v Edenu s svetiščem.
Incidentally, at this point you might be wondering what my aim is, what my final goal
V
is.
tem trenutku se lahko sprašujete, kaj je moj končni cilj.
I have one.
Imam ga, da ne boste
I'm just
mislili.
not telling you yet.
Vam ne bom še razkril.
So stay with me, please.
Prosim, spremljajte.
In the description of Eden,
Ko govorimo o vrtu, v Edenskem vrtu,
we're told that God planted a garden in Eden in the east,
Gospod je zasadil vrt proti vzhodu.
and also that he drove out the man, and at the east of the garden he placed the cherubim.
Izgnal je človeka vzhodno od Edenskega vrta in tam postavil kerube.
Now, why would you place cherubim at the east of Eden
Zakaj bi postavil kerube na vzhodni strani Edena?
rather than the north or the west?
Lahko bi na severu ali pa na zahodu.
Because it must be that is how you enter Eden, from the east.
Očitno je bilo, da si prišel v tempelj z vzhoda.
So the cherubim are there to prevent entry at the entrance.
Keruba sta bila tam, da bi preprečila, da nekdo pride noter.
Then we come to the book of Numbers and we consider the sanctuary.
Potem v 3. Mojzesovi knjigi beremo o svetišču.
And it says, well, could you read it maybe? That'd be best.
Lahko bi prebrali potem pred prebivališčem. Na vzhodni strani pred vzhodnim šotorom proti vzhodu so taborili Mojzes, Aron in njegovi sinovi, ki so bili dolžni oskrbovati službo v svetišču.
It talks about those who are camped on the east of the sanctuary.
Govori se o tistih ljudeh, ki so bili utaborjeni na vzhodu.
It says in front of it,
Pred njim, piše.
because you enter the sanctuary from the east.
Zato, ker ste v svetišče prišli z vzhodne strani.
You entered Eden from the east, you enter the sanctuary
V Eden,
from the
vrt ste
east.
prišli z vzhoda in tudi v svetišče.
And then in Genesis 2 verse 15,
V drugem poglavju 15. vrsti 1. Mojzesove
God puts the man in the Garden of Eden,
Bog postavlja človeka v vrt
and he puts him there to till it and to keep it.
da bi ga obdeloval in varoval.
But it's the particular words that are used. It's interesting.
Zanimivi besedi sta uporabljeni tukaj.
There are two Hebrew words here, avad and shamar.
Avad in šamar sta ti dve besedi.
What is the man to do in the Garden of Eden?
Kaj naj bi človek delal v vrtu v Edenu?
He's to avad and shamar.
Naj bi avad in tudi šamar.
In Numbers chapter 8,
V 4. Mojzesovi 8. poglavju
we are told what the priests are to do in the sanctuary.
beremo o tem, kaj naj bi duhovniki delali v svetišču.
And what do the priests do in the sanctuary?
Kaj torej duhovniki delajo v svetišču?
They avad
Avad
and shamar.
in šamar.
Exactly what the man is to do in the garden
Prav tisto, kar bi naj človek delal v Edenu,
is what the priests are to do in the sanctuary.
so delali tudi duhovniki v svetišču.
So once again, a close connection between Eden
Še enkrat
and
tesna
sanctuary.
povezava med Edenom in svetiščem.
Then another aspect of Eden.
Še nekaj o vrtu v Edenu.
You remember that there are 4 rivers which flow out of Eden.
Spomnite se, da iz Edena tečejo 4 reke.
There are 2 pairs of them.
Dva para sta pravzaprav.
There is the Tigris and the Euphrates.
Eufrat in Tigris
And then we have another called the Pishon and the Gihon.
in drugi par Pišon in Gihon.
Nobody knows anything about Pishon,
Nihče ne ve nič o Pišonu.
but we have Gihon.
Imamo pa Gihon.
Now, Gihon does not occur as a river anywhere else,
Gihon se kot reka ne pojavlja nikjer drugje,
but there is a Gihon.
ampak se omenja.
There is a Gihon mentioned in the Bible.
Omenja se v Svetem pismu.
Do any of you remember about this other Gihon? Anybody remember where it is?
Ali se kdo morda spomni, kje je ta Gihon?
Yes, that's quite right. Quite right.
Prav to.
Yeah.
Gehena
Very
se
good.
misli.
So, if we look, sorry, I forgot to put the text here, but it's in 1 Kings. I forget the
V
exact
prvi,
verse.
oprostite, nisem vam dal besedilo, ampak to je v prvi kraljevi. Da, beremo. Tam so duhovnik Cadok in prerok Natan posadili Salomona na mulo kralja Davida in ga peljali dol v Gihonu. Duhovnik Cadok je mazilil Salomona.
So, the Gihon
Gihon torej
here is not a river,
ni reka,
it is a spring of water.
ampak je izvir vode.
And where do we find the spring of water?
Kje imamo izvir?
It bubbles up out of the rock
In prihaja pravzaprav iz skale
at the base of Jerusalem.
v vznožju Jeruzalema.
So you have Gihon at Jerusalem,
Imate torej Gihon v Jeruzalemu,
stream of water bubbling up out of the rock.
potok, ki prihaja iz skale.
Work your way up that rock and you come to Mount Zion.
Če greš po skali navzgor, prideš, se povzpneš na Sinaj.
And what
Sion, se opravičujem.
And what do we find on the top of Mount Zion?
Kaj na Sionu najdete? Na vrhu?
The temple, the sanctuary.
Tempelj, svetišče.
So as Gihon flows out of Eden,
Kakor Gihon teče iz Edena,
so Gihon flows out of
tako
Mount Zion, the
tako
base of Mount Zion.
Gihon teče iz gore Sion.
One more element here,
Še ena prvina
and that concerns the cherubim.
in se nanaša na kerube.
Here in chapter 3, Genesis 3, verse 24,
To je v 3. poglavju prve Mojzesove 24. vrsta.
we have the cherubim,
Imamo kerube.
and it's placed at the entrance to the garden.
Postavljena sta na vhod v vrt.
Now, in the Bible, let me ask you, in the Bible,
Naj vas vprašam,
where do you find cherubim?
kje najdete kerube v Svetem pismu?
Where do you find cherubim?
Kje torej? In Izaja?
Yes. Well, sorry, my question was ambiguous. It's true, you do find seraphim and so on in the book of Isaiah, that's true.
Ja, imate prav, jaz nisem čisto natančno zastavil vprašanje.
But what I should have asked is, physically, where do you find cherubim in the
Kje
Bible?
dobite
If you wanted to find one, where would you go
če
in
bi hoteli
Israel?
fizično videti, ali kako bi rekel,
You would go to the sanctuary,
šel bi v svetišče, da bi jih videl.
because cherubim are mentioned.
Ker sta omenjena keruba,
I think it is exactly one. No, I shouldn't say exactly, because one of you will tell me it's not exact. But I think it's almost exactly 100 times in the Old Testament.
skoraj 100-krat se omenjajo kerubi v Stari zavezi.
With two exceptions,
Dve izjemi sta,
they are always in the sanctuary.
vedno so v svetišču.
The only two exceptions
Edini dve izjemi
is this one here,
je ta tukaj,
Genesis 3, verse 24,
prva Mojzesova 3:24.
and this passage from the book of Ezekiel, chapter 28.
In tudi v tem odstavku iz Ezekijela,
Could you read that for
28.
me,
poglavje. To bomo prebrali. Bil si ujeden v Božjem vrtu, sami žlahtni kamni so bili tvoja zaščita. Karneol, topaz, jaspis, hrizolit, beril in oniks, safir, rubin in smaragd, tvoji bobni in udolbine so bili izdelani iz zlata, na dan, ko si bil ustvarjen, so bili pripravljeni. Ti si mazilni kerub, za varuha sem te postavil, bil si na sveti Božji gori.
These are the only two passages
To, kar smo tukaj videli, sta edina dva odstavka,
where cherubim are not located explicitly in the sanctuary.
kjer niso kerubi izrecno v svetišču.
But do you notice what Ezekiel mentions?
Ampak ali vidite, kaj tukaj Ezekiel omenja?
He mentions Eden.
Omenja Eden,
He mentions the cherub.
omenja keruba
He mentions at the end there the holy mountain.
in tudi omenja Sveto goro.
What holy mountain might that be, do you think?
Kaj mislite, katera sveta gora je bila to?
Holy Mount
Sveta.
Zion. And remind me, what is on Mount Zion?
Spomnite me, kaj na sveti gori Sionu?
The sanctuary is on Mount
Svetišče.
Zion. And then notice that it talks about some precious stones there, doesn't it? Can you just-
Tukaj vidimo dragulje, ki so omenjeni.
do you want to read just the names of those precious stones?
Zdaj še moram še enkrat prebrati tele. Karneol, topaz, jaspis, hrizolit, beril, inoniks, safir, rubin in smaragd.
Right. A number of precious, semi-precious stones.
Kar nekaj poldragih kamnov tukaj.
We only meet those stones all together in one other place
Te
in the
drage
Bible.
kamne vse na kupu najdemo samo v enem besedilu v Svetem pismu.
Where do we find them?
Kje jih najdemo? Is that the breastplate?
That's right, the breastplate of the high priest.
To je na naprsniku, ki ga je imel veliki duhovnik.
And remind me, because I'm a little bit slow when it comes to this,
Spomnite me, jaz sem nekoliko počasen, ko gre za te stvari.
where does the high priest work?
Kje že dela veliki duhovnik?
In the sanctuary.
V svetišču.
It all comes together.
Vse pride na en kraj.
Eden and sanctuary.
Eden in svetišče.
Creation
Stvarjenje
and sanctuary.
in svetišče.
Creation
Stvarjenje,
is a sanctuary.
svetišče pravzaprav.
We are
Sorry.
living
Jaz sem mislil, da bo zdaj drugače zastavil. Stvarjenje je svetišče.
biblically, yes, we are living in creation.
Po Svetem pismu, da, živimo med ustvarjenimi stvarmi.
But we're also in God's sanctuary,
Ampak smo tudi v Božjem svetišču,
in the midst of that creation.
sredi tega stvarstva.
So, what I've tried to do there is try to get an idea of how people living originally would have heard those texts.
Jaz sem tukaj poskušal predstaviti, kako so slišali besedilo nekoč ljudje, ko so brali to besedilo.
So, I want to look at some implications for understanding the text. Then.
Poglejte, kaj bi pomenilo to razumevanje za nas kot uporabo.
So, at one level, Genesis is interested in ordinary time and ordinary space.
Na eni ravni pravzaprav prva Mojzesova knjiga govori o navadnem času in prostoru.
But at a deeper level, it's interested in holy time and holy space.
Nekoliko bolj globlje je zainteresirano besedilo za sveti čas in sveti prostor.
That is, it's interested in the Sabbath and in
To
the
pomeni
sanctuary.
soboto in svetišče.
Sabbath underlines God's presence in time.
Sobota poudarja Božjo navzočnost v času.
The sanctuary underlines God's presence in space.
Svetišče pa ponazarja oziroma poudarja Božjo navzočnost v prostoru.
So essentially then, what is that telling us?
Kaj nam to v bistvu pove?
I think it's telling us that our entire lives,
Mislim, da nam pove, da je naše celotno življenje,
the time and the space we occupy,
čas in prostor, ki ga zasedamo,
are lived in the presence of God.
mi živimo v Božji navzočnosti.
We live our lives in the presence of God,
Svoje življenje živimo v Božji navzočnosti.
in the time and space,
V času in prostoru,
in the holy time and holy space
v svetem času in na svetem prostoru,
which He has provided.
ki ga je zagotovil.
Now, I know that you have questions for me, but I have a question for you,
Vem, da imate vi vprašanje zame, ampak imam tudi jaz nekaj za vas.
which I'd like to think that we can maybe fit into this small amount of time we have left.
Upam, da bomo vse to lahko spravili v malo časa, ki ga imamo.
I'd like to, first of all, remind you of a time-honored Adventist point of view.
Jaz bi vas najprej rad spomnil na eno gledišče, ki ga imamo adventisti in ki je prestalo test časa.
And I just want to look at one aspect, because we don't have much time left.
Ker nimamo veliko časa, samo en vidik.
Just one aspect of how in practical terms we can apply this view of the text.
To, kar smo zdaj delali, bomo uporabili in ker imamo malo časa, samo eno stvar, praktično.
Now, when I show you the next text, you may wonder why in the world I'm showing it to you.
Ko vam pokažem zdaj naslednji tekst, se boste vprašali, zakaj neki to.
Could you read that, please?
Prebralimo. Bežite pred nečistovanjem. Vsak greh, ki ga stori človek, je zunaj telesa, kdor pa nečistuje, greši proti lastnemu telesu. Mar ne veste, da je vaše telo tempelj svetega duha, ki je v vas in ki ga imate od Boga? Ne pripadate sebi, saj ste odkupljeni za visoko ceno.
Well, that is a bit odd, isn't it, going off to 1 Corinthians?
Ali ni malo nenavadno, da se znajdemo zdaj v 1. Korinčanom?
But you notice what this text, well known in Adventist circles, you notice what the text says?
Ampak to, kar je adventistom zelo dobro znano, zapazite, kaj govori.
Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy
Ali
Spirit?
ne veste, da je vaše telo tempelj svetega duha?
Your body is a sanctuary.
Vaše telo je svetišče.
And Paul draws an important point from that.
In iz tega vleče neko posebno, naredi poseben zaključek.
You see what he says at the end
Pavel.
there.
Poglejte, kaj na koncu pravi. Zato poveličujte Boga v svojem telesu.
What Paul is saying is, if you believe that your body is a sanctuary,
Pavel pravi, če verujete, da je vaše telo tempelj,
there are implications for how you live.
potem se to nanaša na način življenja vašega.
If our bodies are sanctuaries,
Če so naša telesa svetišča,
how then should we live?
kako naj bi živeli?